Stepmother seduced my husband, then blamed me for ruining her marriage. I had always thought I married into a family of prestige, power, and deep-rooted loyalty. Ethan and I had been together for 4 years, married for 3. He was the love of my life, steady, devoted, the kind of man you could rely on. His father, Robert Caldwell, was a titan in the business world, a man whose word could shift stock markets, whose name carried weight in every corner of high society. But nothing could have prepared me for Victoria. She entered our lives like a perfectly crafted illusion, too elegant, too charming, too intoxicating to be real. At 45, she had the kind of beauty that made men stupid and women suspicious. Long, wavy blonde hair, piercing blue eyes that held just a flicker of something unreadable, and a body that she knew how to use to her advantage. She had married Robert after his first wife, Ethan's mother, passed away. Unlike most gold diggers, Victoria didn't try to appear humble. She wore her wealth as effortlessly as she wore her deep-cut designer dresses. At first, I thought she was just another high-maintenance socialite, someone who relished in luxury but ultimately harmless. I was wrong. It started with small things, a lingering touch on Ethan's arm during family dinners, the way her eyes scanned him, not like a stepmother admiring her stepson, but like a woman who saw something she wanted. The way she laughed at his jokes a second too long, her fingers grazing his sleeve as she leaned in closer than necessary. I told myself I was imagining it, until the night of the Caldwell Gala. The estate was alight with golden chandeliers, the hum of conversation, and the clinking of champagne glasses filling the grand hall. The event was a yearly tradition, a celebration of Robert's growing business empire, where the elite of the elite gathered to sip vintage wine and exchange veiled insults disguised as pleasantries. I wore an emerald green satin gown that hugged my figure, its low-cut neckline draping elegantly over my collarbones. I had chosen it because Ethan always said green made my eyes stand out. He was across the room now, speaking with his father and a few high-profile investors. I took a sip of champagne, my gaze wandering. That's when I saw her. Victoria stood at Ethan's side, draped in a crimson gown that left very little to the imagination. She tilted her head back, laughing at something he had said, her perfectly manicured fingers resting lightly on his wrist. I watched as her hand lingered. Too intimate, too familiar. My stomach clenched. Ethan, oblivious, took a step back, offering a polite smile. But Victoria leaned in, whispering something in his ear that made his expression shift, his jaw tightening for just a fraction of a second before he nodded stiffly. That's when her eyes flicked to me, and she smirked. It was subtle, quick, barely there, but I caught it. I set my glass down and made my way toward them, my heels clicking against the marble floors. "Darling!" Victoria greeted me smoothly before I could even open my mouth. She reached out, taking both my hands in hers, her grip cool and firm. "You look stunning tonight." I forced a smile. "So do you." Her blue eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite name. "Isn't it lovely, Sophia? Watching our husbands thrive?" I stiffened. "Ethan's doing incredibly well." She tilted her head slightly, her blonde waves cascading over one shoulder. "Yes, he is. He reminds me so much of Robert when he was younger. So powerful, so capable." My fingers curled slightly at my sides. Ethan, sensing the shift in tension, cleared his throat. "Sophie? I was just telling Victoria about our new project at the firm." Victoria smiled, stepping closer to Ethan once more. "Yes, Ethan has been telling me so many things lately." There it was again. That hidden meaning behind her words, that tone. I had spent years in high society, learned the delicate art of reading between the lines, and I knew, with a certainty that sent ice trickling down my spine, that Victoria was playing a game. I just didn't know the rules yet. I told myself I was overthinking it, that Victoria was just being her usual flirtatious, attention-seeking self. But as the days passed, my unease grew. She was always around. If Ethan stayed late at the office, she happened to drop by with dinner for him. If we were at a family gathering, she conveniently needed his help with something trivial. She found excuses to text him, call him, insert herself into his world. And every time I tried to address it, she made me feel like the paranoid wife. Then, one evening, I walked into Ethan's office and saw her sitting on his desk. She wore a silk, deep red dress, one leg crossed over the other, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of a wineglass. Ethan sat in his chair, stiff, uncomfortable. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as she leaned in, laughing at something he had said. I froze in the doorway. "Victoria," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She turned with a slow, deliberate smile. "Oh, Sophia, you're early." I stepped inside, keeping my gaze steady. Didn't realize I needed an appointment to see my husband. Ethan stood quickly, brushing Victoria's hand away as he straightened his tie. "She was just dropping off some files for my father," he said, but there was tension in his voice. I folded my arms. "Right. And the wine?" Victoria chuckled, swirling her glass. "Oh, darling, can't a woman enjoy a drink while discussing business?" Her blue eyes locked onto mine, and I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a game. One she was playing to win. A week later, I received a message that changed everything. It was from my friend, Lena. "Have you seen this?" Attached was a screenshot of a blind gossip post. The headline was vague, but the implication was deadly. Which high-profile lawyer's wife has been sneaking around with a mystery man? My stomach twisted. The post didn't name me outright, but the details were too close to be a coincidence. The comments were flooded with speculation, some even throwing my name into the mix. Someone had planted this, and I knew exactly who. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, phone in hand, waiting for Ethan to come home. When he finally walked in, he loosened his tie, barely noticing the tension in my posture. "Hey, what's wrong?" I tossed my phone onto the bed. "Look at this." He picked it up, his brows furrowing as he read. Then he exhaled sharply. "Sophia, this is nonsense." "Is it?" I demanded. "Because someone clearly wants people to think I'm cheating on you." He shook his head. "It's a tabloid. You can't take this seriously." I stood, crossing my arms. "You don't think it's weird that Victoria has been acting like this, and now suddenly a story about me cheating surfaces?" Ethan sighed. "You think Victoria's behind this?" "Yes." "That's a serious accusation." "Sophia," I laughed bitterly. "Ethan, she has been all over you for weeks, and now she's making me look like the unfaithful one. Can you not see what's happening?" He rubbed his temples, frustration flickering across his face. "You're making this into something bigger than it is." My heart cracked at his words. He didn't believe me, not yet. The next day, Victoria went in for the kill. She visited Robert at home, crying. She told him she had seen something horrible, Mr. with another man. By the time Ethan and I arrived at the estate that evening, Robert was furious. "You have some nerve showing your face here," he spat at me the moment I stepped inside. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Victoria told me everything." He threw a folder onto the table. Inside were photos, me at a restaurant, speaking to a male colleague. The angles were carefully chosen, the lighting poor. If you didn't know better, it could look suspicious. Ethan picked up a photo, his jaw tightening. "Dad, this is ridiculous. That's one of Sophia's co-workers." Robert's eyes burned into me. "Are you denying it?" I clenched my fists. "Of course I am. This is insane." Then Victoria stepped out from behind him. Her makeup was flawless, not a single smudge despite the supposed tears she had shed. She held her robe closed, looking fragile, broken, an act. "I tried to keep it to myself," she whispered, "but I couldn't. I love this family too much." I stared at her. The audacity, the sheer evil in her performance. Robert sighed, rubbing his face. "Ethan, son, I don't know what to do." Victoria took a shaky breath. "I didn't want to say anything, but Ethan." She hesitated, eyes glistening with fake vulnerability. He's been pursuing me." The room plunged into silence. Ethan stiffened. "What?" Victoria's voice broke. "I told him to stop. I begged him. I love you, Robert. I would never." Her voice caught, her shoulders trembling, my breath hitched. This was her master move. She wasn't just painting me as a liar. She was painting Ethan as the real villain. Robert turned to his son, his expression horrified. "Tell me this isn't true." Ethan took a step forward, his face pale with disbelief. "Dad, it's not." Victoria let out a strangled sob, turning her face away like she couldn't even bear to look at him. Robert's gaze hardened. "Until I sort this out, I want both of you out of this house." Ethan and I stood frozen. Victoria met my gaze over Robert's shoulder. And then, she smirked. We stood there in complete shock as Robert's words hung heavy in the air. "Until I sort this out, I want both of you out of this house." Victoria, still dabbing her fake tears, refused to meet Ethan's gaze. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Dad, this is insane. You're taking her word over mine?" Robert's cold stare didn't waver. "You think I'd believe you after what I just heard?" I swallowed my anger. This wasn't just about trust. This was about control. Victoria had Robert wrapped around her finger, and he was too blind to see it. Without another word, I grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the door. If Robert wanted to believe his lying wife, he was going to learn the truth the hard way. That night, Ethan and I sat in a cheap hotel room, the glow of the city spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan stared blankly at the untouched glass of whiskey in his hands. "She destroyed everything," he murmured. I refused to let him spiral. "She hasn't won yet." He let out a humorless laugh. "My own father thinks I seduced his wife." I sat down beside him, grabbing his wrist. "Ethan, look at me. We know the truth. And now, we're going to prove it." His brown eyes met mine, filled with doubt and exhaustion. I exhaled sharply. I wasn't going to let Victoria win. The next morning, I met Lena Carter, an investigative journalist and my closest friend, at a high-end cafe. She slid her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. "So, you're telling me Victoria Caldwell set up her own stepson?" I nodded. "And that's just the tip of the iceberg." I handed her a thick folder. Inside were bank records, testimonies, and photos of Victoria with several wealthy men. Men who mysteriously cut ties with their families before filing for divorce. Lena let out a low whistle. "Damn, she's a professional." I leaned forward. "I need you to expose her. Everything." Lena smirked. "Oh, honey, consider it done." Within 24 hours, the media erupted. Victoria Caldwell's web of lies exposed. Stepmother frames own stepson. But the evidence says otherwise. Multiple families come forward against Victoria Caldwell. I watched the headlines spread like wildfire as former employees, ex-wives, and even past victims came forward with their own stories. Victoria's empire of deception was crumbling. Then the final blow hit. Leaked security footage. Victoria in Ethan's office, leaning in, touching his arm, whispering something suggestive. Ethan pulling away. The world saw the truth. Robert called that night. His voice was hollow. "I need to see you both." When Ethan and I arrived at the estate the next morning, Victoria was already waiting. She sat on the white velvet sofa, her posture still regal, but her face pale. I sat across from her, resting my hands in my lap, feeling the power shift. Robert cleared his throat. "Victoria, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Her lips twitched, but she held her chin high. "It's all lies," Ethan scoffed. "You expect us to believe that, even after the footage?" Her mask cracked. "You did this," she hissed, her blue eyes burning into mine. I smiled. "I just let the truth come out." Robert exhaled, rubbing his face. "Victoria, I want you out." She shot up from her seat. "You can't do this." "I can." His voice hardened. "And I am." For the first time, Victoria looked powerless. She grabbed her purse, her fingers trembling. As she turned to leave, she met my gaze one last time. And I swore, for just a second, I saw fear. Victoria vanished from the public eye. With lawsuits piling up and her reputation destroyed, she fled the country. Robert, left humiliated, apologized to Ethan. Ethan and I? We were free. But the damage Victoria left behind took time to heal. We had survived, and she had lost everything. Looking back, I realized that Victoria never stood a chance against the truth. No matter how carefully she wove her lies, no matter how masterfully she played her role, deception always has an expiration date. She thought she could manipulate her way to power, that she could pit a father against his son, a husband against his wife. But in the end, she lost everything. And Ethan and I, we walked away, not just victorious, but stronger. Not all scars fade easily. Betrayal leaves its mark, even when justice is served. Ethan and I had to rebuild trust, to remind ourselves that we were never enemies, that Victoria had only been a distraction, a storm we had to weather together. But most importantly, I learned to never doubt my instincts again. Because when something feels off, when the warning signs start appearing, they aren't coincidence. They're the truth trying to reveal itself. And I promise you, next time, I won't hesitate to listen,